and welcome to a brand new episode of our Sunderland Man No Filters podcast. It's Maternal Mental Health Week, a week-long campaign dedicated to talking about mental health problems before, during and after pregnancy. This week we are encouraging you to start the conversation around maternal mental health. To get the ball rolling, we caught up with one of our counsellors, Catherine, to chat all about what maternal mental health is, factors that can affect it, and what support is out there to help those struggling. So hi Catherine, thanks for coming along to the podcast today. Do you want to introduce yourself to everybody?
I'm Catherine, I'm one of the counsellors at Sunderland Mind. I'm here today to talk about maternal mental health. The reason I chose to speak about this is my journey with my own mental health is what brought me to train to be a counsellor.
Oh, amazing.
So it's really close to my heart.
Fab. So do you want to tell us a little bit about what maternal mental health is?
I suppose we start at the beginning. So essentially we're talking about people who feel like they're in the role as a mother, and the reason I say it like that is simply journeys to motherhood can be really diverse. So in an ideal world it's in a supportive relationship and it's all being planned and everything's really secure and structured, but actually that's not what happens for a lot of people. Sometimes they can have a complex fertility journey, there's fostering, there's adopting, there's all sorts. So I think it was really important not just to see women who've given birth, because they're not the only people who are mothers.
No, and I think it's a very wide umbrella, isn't it, that lots of people fit into.
It's a really demanding role, and it's really filled by a lot of diverse people, I think, so I don't want to ignore anyone. It's tough enough without people feeling ignored.
Absolutely. Well, do you want to talk a little bit about that? You said it was sort of based on your personal experience with maternal mental health. What sort of factors do you find that can affect it?
I mean, there's all sorts of things. Firstly, your journey to motherhood in the first place, how was that? What was that experience? Because often people who had a more complex journey to being a parent, particularly if there's been fertility or there's been fertility issues or there's been adoptions, actually they often give themselves higher expectations, and self-expectation is kind of the first risk factor in a lot of ways, in that quite often mothers hold themselves to incredibly unfair and unrealistic standards. I often use the Mary Poppins concept, but actually, she was practically perfect in every way, but A, she wasn't real, and B, she wasn't actually a mother.
You don't even think about that, do you?
She got the clock off at the end of the day. So even the expectation that people have for themselves, that figure is actually, it's not real. So I think that's kind of the first place to start, but actually there's a lot of risk factors. You've got physical risk factors in terms of, for people who gave birth, how that happened. Was it a traumatic birth? There's a higher risk if you've had a caesarean section. Birth trauma, sometimes people are left with quite significant physical problems for a long time after birth. Difficulties in breastfeeding. I'm not even going to get into that debate. That's not for today. But that can cause a lot of issues for a lot of people. The choices they've made, comments they hear from other people.
There's a lot of sort of stigma around it all, isn't there?
Massively, and I think we often lose sight of actually, fed babies and content mothers are what's important in all of it, and that gets lost. It gets lost far too often. Which is, again, it's just unfair on mums. I think they're expected to be superheroes, and they are in so many different ways, but they're also allowed to be humans, and they don't have to do absolutely everything, because it's a varied journey for everyone. And I think it's recognising that, not comparing yourselves to others, because nobody's in exactly the same circumstances. Everybody's facing different struggles, and I'd be really surprised if I met somebody who was raising children who didn't struggle with something.
And just because they're presenting that they're not struggling doesn't mean that that's their reality at all, does it? So.
Well, exactly. Quite often, if you're meeting people in real life, you hear the highlight reel, and on social media, that's what you see as well. You don't kind of see the 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Oh God, is that the time? Is it not bedtime yet? I'm done for the day. How do I get through the next few hours? You don't see how many cups of coffee got them through the day, or how many
even got drank.
How many half-drunk cups of coffee or cold coffees are all over the house. So I think it just comes down to giving yourself a break as well. I think it really It really, really does, and that's just the stuff that affects the mums. You then come into parents who have to deal with perhaps their baby's got health issues, which is another added strain on the parents. And I think what gets lost sometimes is parenting's just really hard. It just is. Mm-hmm. Even if you've got the ideal scenario in every area, it's still really hard. Mm-hmm. And you're still allowed to struggle too, because I think quite often people feel like, well, I haven't got it as bad as someone else. They don't feel like they have the right to struggle.
But just because you think yours isn't as bad as somebody else doesn't mean that yours isn't still difficult.
Exactly. Well, exactly.
In every aspect of life, anything that you're dealing with, it's still a struggle in its own right, and you're experiencing it, so you're allowed to find them things difficult.
Well, exactly, because it's just hard. If you think about what happens, when a child comes into your life, you lose control of so much of it willingly because you love that child. Mm-hmm. And although we're talking about maternal mental health in terms of the struggles, there's lots of wonderful things about being a parent, but it's also incredibly difficult. It brings about so much change. Your life can become a bit more restricted in terms of what you do with your time, what you do with your money, all of it. Your sleep, massively your sleep. So if you quite often as a mother you're at home, rather you're on maternity leave or adoption leave, that social support that you would normally have, you're less in contact with the people you work in, kind of that idea of who you are as a person. Now, well, I'm not at work, I'm at home, I'm a mum, but actually you can lose yourself in that for quite a long time. Mm-hmm. Because it's so intense.
And you've sort of given up everything else. Mm-hmm. For the sake of this baby, that obviously that your sense of self, like you said, just must just disappear, or at least be reduced to the point where you used to know it before.
It's who am I now? I'm a parent. Because there's very few, certainly in the early days, there's not many situations where you're not you as a mother, and that's not the first thing that people see. Mm-hmm. Quite often people get really anxious about going back to work because they don't want to leave the little one, and that's been their whole world for the time they've been off. But often they find that that's the time if they're able to go back, because that's another consideration, that sometimes circumstances have changed and it's actually not viable for them to go back to work. Mm-hmm. So then there's a whole change in their identity in that aspect. That now you're not able to be at work, you're at home with your little one. And work, not everybody loves their job as much as we do, but it's still part of who you are. Yeah.
And you're not just a mother in those early stages either. Once you have a child, you are a mother. That's something that sticks with you all the way through life, all the way to when your children are leaving the nest and going out in sort of the real world and becoming adults themselves, people that have lost children, all that sort of stuff. You're still a mother.
Well, yeah, exactly, and quite often that's obviously in the work I do. I meet lots of parents, and sometimes mums who didn't get to take the babies home, they know they're a mum, but nobody else, quite often not anybody around them recognises them as a parent, but they are still a parent. Yeah. That's still part of who they are. Mm-hmm. And on the not the flip side of that, but in other areas, like you say, when kids leave home, that's actually something that mums really struggle with quite a lot often, that you don't necessarily expect. Mm-hmm. There's lots of areas of being a parent that are incredibly difficult.
But do you find that people sort of expect themselves to be I'm in it now, in a case of they're not so young anymore, so I should be fine about all these sort of things, and then they're just not?
Absolutely. I think quite often, like you say, it's almost like once the baby phase is over, you should just find it easy, because you get to sleep through the night if you're lucky. But because so many people have kids, I wonder if it's because a lot of people are doing it. Surely it mustn't be that hard. It's almost like you can't expect yourself to think it's hard, but it's hard at loads of different ages for loads of different reasons. I remember meeting somebody at playgroup who had older kids as well. We were a baby group, but they had much older kids as well, and I was really struggling at the time, and I just kind of said, please tell me this gets easier, and she just went, just gets different.
You know what, right? That's such a nice way of saying it. Yeah. Maybe it might not get easier, but it gets different and it changes, and maybe you find that sort of easier to deal with at different stages, because while your child is growing up, or so are you, so you have different perspectives as you get older.
Absolutely. I'm just smiling thinking of that moment and being like, at the time that just felt really overwhelming, but now my mental health's a lot better. I kind of get what they meant and it doesn't feel quite as worrying, but also I think it's getting on board and being okay with, you know what, it is challenging, that's normal. You're not failing because you think it's hard. And I think that's one of the things I really thought, because I saw all these people presenting me with everything that was great about what was going on, perhaps not hearing as much about people's struggles, and thought I was failing because I was struggling.
When really you just needed the reality.
100%. I just needed other mums to say, oh my God, I'm so tired. Oh, this is so hard. Oh, I felt really resentful in this time, because there's a lot of completely normal emotions that people don't talk about.
Do you think it's because of the guilt around them?
Oh, guilt's the biggest thing. I think you get the child, you get the guilt.
Hand in hand together.
Immediately. It's like I didn't devote 100% of all my energies throughout this entire day to my child. I'm guilty now, you know, I should have, and I should be doing this, I should be doing that. I think quite often everybody's comparing all the time, and kids just do things when they're going to do things. They're going to be who they are, and I think there's this idea that, you know, it's just down, and parents play a massive role in their children's lives, of course they do, but actually they are just small human beings, and part of what they bring and part of who they are is just how they are. It's how they were always going to be, and I think we need to let go of that responsibility as well. It's not our job to program these people to be a version that we think they should be, because should again.
It's just about supporting them along the way on that journey, isn't it?
Yeah.
Really? No matter how long you've got them in your life for.
Letting them be themselves and helping them learn that them is exactly as they are okay.
Because you learn from each other during the process, don't you? They learn from you, you learn from them, and how to steer that direction.
It takes a long time to learn that, I think. It really does.
Because again, like, people only know how to parent based on sort of what they surround themselves with, how they regard up. Like, there's the grandparents' role, if you've got that support and stuff.
Well, if you've got that support, I think that's the other side of those environmental risk factors, that actually some people don't have any of that. They didn't have a healthy... Exactly, they didn't grow up in a healthy family. They're doing their absolute best to break a cycle of unhealthy behaviours, and quite often they don't recognise how well they're doing by working towards that, recognising that cycle of unhealthy behaviour, and B, working to change it. And quite often I meet in the counselling role, I meet people who would be, to me, that I think it's amazing. I think it's an absolutely amazing thing to be able to do, because not only do they change things for their children, but those children afterwards. And quite often they just don't recognise what an achievement that is, but it's huge. And it'll affect people they're never going to meet in a positive way. Wow,
what a nice way to think about it. Like, the little changes are just like trickling down the chain for generations. So you're having impact on the future that you don't even know about yet. And I think sometimes people must feel the pressure with that if they recognise it. But really, like, it's just something nice if you think about it that way, isn't it?
Yeah, I think quite often when I meet people in the counselling room, it's working with them to recognise what they've really achieved by creating a healthy family environment when they didn't have one. It's an absolute monumental achievement, and I think again it comes down to most of the time mums are really modest.
Yeah.
They're really good at being the kids' cheerleader, but not so much for themselves, not recognising what a good job they're doing. Quite often, most mums are doing a pretty amazing job.
You know what, like, if about trying to find, as long as your child is healthy and happy in the way that you can deliver that as most as possible, and in what is right for that child, then that should be enough sometimes.
I think now, based on the work that I do now, a lot of the time it's simply that they need to be safe, they need to be loved, and they need to be aware that they're good enough. If you're delivering on those things, anything else is just icing on the cake. And we can get lost in all of the other, I just call it fluff, things that aren't as important as we think they are, in terms of what grades they got, what job they do, what car they drive, what house they've bought. None of those things are really important if that person doesn't feel like it's enough. Doesn't feel okay within themselves.
But that sort of goes for whoever the mother figure in that situation is, as well as the child or young person or adult or whoever is in that situation. It's like I said, you don't stop being a mum just because your child becomes 18.
No, well, exactly.
Or 30 or 40 or however long you get to be in each other's lives for.
So although typically when you talk about maternal mental health, they focus on the first 2 years. Like you say, actually, from the minute you feel like you're a mother, that's going to put there are things that are going to affect your mental health. And for me, maternal mental health is something that goes far beyond those years, starts earlier than that, and goes far beyond that too.
So we talked a little bit about support in terms of sort of grandparents.
If you've got them.
If you've got them, exactly.
If you've got them and they're healthy.
Exactly. What sort of help and support is there available for people who are maternal figures, who are maybe struggling with their maternal mental health, people who maybe don't even recognise that they're struggling with it?
I mean, I would say the first place to start is quite often your health visitor. Because they look after children, families until the child's roughly 2 years old. Right. So they're quite often the place somebody to speak to, because they'll typically also have an awareness of peer support groups, which are massively important, particularly if you don't have that additional support around you in terms of extended family or support friendship groups. Perhaps you don't know many mums, or you don't know many mums with kids a similar age to yours, and it's sometimes helpful to share that journey. So they're a good place to start. Also your GP. Sometimes you may need some counselling, you may need medication. So they're always a good place to start. If you're lucky enough to have friends and family who are supportive and feel supportive to you, because they're not always the same thing, then absolutely reach out to them.
There's no shame in it.
There's not, but it's very hidden, because a lot of people do feel there's this idea that if you're struggling with your mental health, there's some part of motherhood that you're failing at. Yeah, absolutely not.
No, if anything, surely by reaching out, it's just showing how much strength that you do have.
Massively.
And that's the opposite of failure, because you're wanting to better yourself and better the future for your child and stuff by making you in a better position.
It's just about mums being healthy. That's it. And I think there is a lot of shame attached to maternal mental health, and there shouldn't be, there doesn't need to be. It's an incredibly hard job, and there's a lot of pressure on parents, and they deserve the support they need. There's no shame, there really isn't any shame in asking for help.
They deserve to feel proud for the fact that they've sort of reached out. And
it's hard, reaching out for support is really difficult, because it's making yourself vulnerable. So reaching out in places of safety is really important, places where you feel that are safe.
Which is obviously why you said as well that friends and family that you feel that you can have that conversation with, because in a state where you're already so vulnerable, to then open yourself to even more vulnerability, you need that level of control about it a little bit, to know that you trust the people that you're speaking to.
For some people it might not be their own mother or grandparent, it may be a sister, it may be an aunt, it may be a close friend,
or whoever their mother figure is in their life. Like you said, it's not just when being a mother isn't necessarily just like a biological link. There's lots of other ways of being that maternal figure in somebody's life.
Exactly, and I think that's the important part, reaching out places where you can trust, where there's safety and trust. Because it's already such a challenging time. You don't want to make that worse. I think that's quite often why people are concerned about reaching out, but if you reach out to those safe places, then you may well get the support you need. Quite often just having somebody else to speak to and say, you know what, this is really hard and I feel rubbish. And to hear, actually I felt really rubbish that when I was going through that, or I'm feeling pretty rotten right now as well.
Yeah.
It's just that connection with other people to say, actually, you know what, I'm not alone, I'm not on my own.
Mm-hmm.
There's kind of your national organisations you can look at, there's a lot of information. They've got National Minds website's got some information on. There's an organisation called Pandas which specialises in supporting people with postnatal depression, so they've got quite a lot of information on their website.
We'll make sure we link all of these in the description of the podcast as well, so people can just click and make sure that they get access to those if they want to do a bit more research, or if they think that they want to find out some more.
Because sometimes just reading a bit more information to kind of normalise your experience can be really helpful to say that all of this, you know, this resentment, this anger, this irritability, this sheer just, you know, like you get up and got up and went.
Yeah.
That's kind of stop the world, I want to get off for a little bit feeling. It is normal.
Because I think sometimes I imagine with sort of how chocker the life of being a parent is, you might not feel like you've got enough time to do those things.
Massively.
But really, in terms of consuming the media or reaching out, there can be something that's like, if you start scrolling, like the 2 minutes you've got while you're having a cuppa, or like when you just go to bed.
Exactly.
Like,
even if you can only squeeze in 5 minutes of self-care in that day, then that's the most important 5 minutes of that day, because that's what helps you sustain that. Like you say, is it when you know the kids, you hope most likely the kids are going to be settled, even if it's just for 5 minutes, instead of tidying up, because the mess will be there again tomorrow. Have a cuppa if that's what you want. Sit and have a scroll finding because like I say, that social media you're consuming is really important. Who are you following? Are you following people presenting everything's wonderful and everything's shiny and beautiful and my house is immaculate and my kids are like superstars and this is just fabulous all of the time? Which naturally any normal human person is going to feel rotten compared to that.
Yeah.
Or are you also mixing in people who are presenting a normal view of parenting?
And I think that's really important to distinguish that difference, isn't
Massively.
it? Because if you're consuming people who are presenting the perfect life, and realistically that's a highlight reel, like you're not seeing all the other stuff that's probably very realistic and exactly what you're experiencing. Exactly. They're hiding that behind the highlight reel, or are you?
They've moved everything out of the way. They've moved the mess out of the way while they did the video.
The clean little corner. Or are you sort of consuming the reality of the situation? And there is some really good people on social media that are presenting that now to try and normalise the behaviour and destigmatise the whole thing.
I could have done with that. There wasn't as much of that when I had mine a little bit older, so there wasn't really as much of that as there is now, and I think it's a really good thing. I think presenting the reality so people who are just living normal parent life can see that reflected in the media they're consuming.
But like, don't be afraid to go down your follower list and just get rid of it.
Get rid of
it. You don't need to be consuming that material if it's just going to make you worse. There's nothing better in that moment than just going through your socials, and either maybe you need to mute them for a bit and you just don't need them in your space for a little while and you're having a little detox.
Noticing how those posts make you feel when you view them.
Or maybe you just need to clean out your follower list, because
you can even unfollow friends and family if what they post make you feel rotten.
Exactly. Like your follower list isn't like nobody needs that other than you, so nobody needs to know who you're following or not. Like, it's your space. Like, you don't owe that to anybody else.
I would absolutely recommend unfollowing friends and family that make you feel rotten. And all of it. I think it's really important to be mindful of what you're consuming. I think you don't realise the impact that has on you, but if that's something you choose to do in the little pocket of time you have for yourself, it needs to be something that's restorative for you, not something that makes you feel worse. Something that at least makes you feel, I'm okay.
Because if you're having those 5 minutes of self-care in your safe space, why are you letting everything else infiltrate and make it worse? Take control of that aspect as well.
Massively.
But again, sometimes you don't even realise it until you're just in the slump and you're feeling that way, which is why reaching out wherever you can is so important to have
and you've recognised it. Once you recognise this is what it is, you've got the power because you know what's happening. It won't, you know, you won't feel better overnight, but you know what's going on now. And that's that is genuinely the biggest step. And also, once you've been through it once, you've got a greater awareness, so you know when you're starting to struggle again, you're more mindful of that, you notice it sooner, and you've got an awareness of what you need to do to come back. So, outside of reaching out to kind of the support sources we talked about, self-care is probably the other most important thing for parents.
It's probably the thing that gets shot off first as well. It is for many people.
It's essential.
Either a parent or not.
It's not, you know, and when I talk about self-care, I don't mean having a bubble bath for an hour.
No.
I mean, if you can and it brings you joy, do it.
But
absolutely do it. But there's so many more things. Again,
going back to like social media and stuff, it's not just like sticking a face mask on and bubble bath. 100% can be those things if, like you said, if that's what you bring joy. But self-care literally can be as much as having a cuppa and sitting on the back step and just having some peace for 2 minutes.
Grocery shopping on your own does not count, because that is still a job. That is not self-care. Although that probably feels quite joyful sometimes, because it's one of the few things perhaps you get the opportunity to do on your own. It doesn't count.
Maybe even if you're like just sitting in the car park for like 10 minutes after you've done it, and like
that's the self-care
taking a long way home, driving past like the seafront or something, or grab yourself a coffee on the way back. Like
that's
maybe
the
that's
part
where
you
the self-care comes in.
Yeah, absolutely. And giving you giving yourself that 10 minutes, even if it is just sat in the car park before you go. You can even buy yourself a nice snack while you're there doing it.
Because, and again, shouldn't feel guilty for that, because these are the things you need to recharge, to be able to be that parent, the things that you need.
Absolutely.
That all sounds great. So is there anything else that we haven't covered that you want to add, Catherine, before we go?
There's probably a lot of things we haven't covered.
Yeah.
But if I'm honest, I think I just want to reinforce how important that self-care is and how vital it is, whatever that means to you. You're struggling because it's hard, not because you're failing. Take care of you, because if you're okay, your kids will be fine.
Absolutely, and every mothering experience is completely different from everybody else's.
Absolutely.
So there might be things that you're experiencing that we haven't covered, or things that we've covered that might not be relatable to you, but at the end of the day, you know your experience, and you know if you're struggling. So hopefully some of the things we've talked about today validates that a little bit, or at least offers you some opportunities to sort of gauge support moving forward. Wonderful, thanks for coming, Catherine.
Welcome.
Thank you for listening to the latest episode of Sunderland Man No Filters. We hope you enjoyed it. All support information discussed in the episode can be found listed in the description, along with relevant support organisations. You can find us on Facebook at Mind Sunderland or at sunderlandmind.co.uk. You can also find us on Instagram, YouTube and Twitter at Sunderland Mind. Don't forget to like and share this episode of the podcast, and we'll see you next time.